Billionaire. CEO's daughter was paralyzed. So why did a single dad say, "Let me try"? Before we begin, comment below and tell us, where are you watching from? And when it's over, be sure to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. She was the most powerful woman in the city. Ruthless in boardrooms, untouchable in headlines. But when her son stopped speaking after the accident, not all her billions could buy hope. And so, she knocked on the door of a broken man with calloused hands, a grieving heart, and a gift he swore he'd never use again. This isn't just a story about healing a child. It's about how two shattered lives found a reason to begin again, and how love, when spoken in silence, changes everything. Southridge wasn't the kind of place CEOs visited, not unless they were lost or running from something, and Evelyn Chase was both. She stood at the edge of the cracked walkway, her stilettos sinking slightly into the dirt, completely out of place beside the rusted mailbox and wind chime made from old soda cans. Her silver Porsche idled behind her, gleaming like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong decade. She clutched a plain manila envelope in her manicured hands. Hands that had once signed billion-dollar acquisitions without flinching. Now they trembled from the window of the rundown house. A little girl was watching. Inside, Cal Dawson was sanding a splintered table leg, his sleeves rolled up, forearms dusted with pine shavings. His workshop smelled of cedar and sawdust, of quiet, useful things. He didn't look up when the car pulled in. People with money didn't come to him. Not since the accident. Not since the medical board hearings. Not since his life had folded in on itself. But then there was a knock. And something in that knock, sharp, desperate, too rehearsed, made him pause. He opened the door slowly. There she was, Evelyn Chase, CEO of Chase Biomed. Her photo was everywhere. Tech magazines, healthcare summits, even gossip blogs that speculated about her love life. But standing here on his porch, she looked human, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. And her lipstick was cracked like she hadn't reapplied in hours, maybe days. "My son," she said, just 2 words, and they broke. Cal looked at the envelope in her hands, then at her, then down at his own. "I don't do that anymore," he said. "I was told you helped children once," she whispered. "Before you left. Before you disappeared." She didn't say. "Before your wife died." The papers said. Cal's jaw clenched. "I build furniture now." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Then build him something he can believe in." Her voice cracked at the end. And in that crack, something inside Cal shifted. Upstairs, Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, was painting quietly in her room. She didn't know who the woman was, but she knew that whenever her father looked like that, like he'd seen a ghost, it meant someone had knocked on a door they shouldn't. Evelyn handed him the envelope. Inside, photos. A 12-year-old boy named Henry, with sandy hair and dark, unreadable eyes. Pre-accident, science fairs, piano recitals, birthday candles. Post-accident, silence, blank stares, refusal to speak, eat, or even look up. They said it was trauma. Evelyn said, voice brittle. But I've hired every therapist, every doctor, even one in Switzerland, who charges more than my entire research division's payroll. Cal set the photos down, said nothing. Then Evelyn said something that finally made him look up. "They told me you saved children who'd stopped speaking after trauma, that you didn't just help them talk, you helped them come back." Cal's throat moved, but no words came out. "And now, I can't reach my son, not with lullabies, not with toys, not even with love." She laughed, broken and soft. "And I have nothing left to try, except you." He stared at her for a long moment. Then quietly, he said, "Love's not a tool, Miss Chase, and she answered, neither is silence. As the wind stirred the chimes on the porch, Cal stepped aside. Let me meet him, he said. She blinked, then nodded. The man who'd sworn he'd never help again had just said yes. Chapter 1. The Woman Behind the Glass. The first thing Evelyn noticed about the house wasn't the peeling paint or the leaning porch. It was the glass. The windows were clean, not sparkling, not showy, just clean, cared for, as if someone inside still believed the world was worth seeing. She didn't know why that unsettled her more than the rusted gutters or the wild garden, but it did. She adjusted her coat. Cashmere, custom cut, the kind of fabric meant for city penthouses and boardrooms, not neighborhoods where you could smell someone else's laundry 2 doors down. She felt exposed, out of place. From the car, her assistant had begged her not to come alone. Send someone. Brielle had pleaded. This guy's a recluse. He hasn't practiced in years. I'm not sending a stranger to beg for my son's life. Evelyn had replied, this isn't business. This is different. Now, standing outside his door, she wasn't so sure. Inside, Cal Dawson was sanding a rocking chair meant for someone else's baby. The kind of work that didn't ask for words or smiles or credentials, just patience, just presence. He'd built 50 chairs since moving to Southridge, given away half. The other half sat in corners of homes where babies were rocked to sleep by mothers who never knew the man behind the curve of the armrest or the notch in the back slat. He liked it that way. But today, something was off, a scent in the air, not cedar or glue, something colder, metallic, even than the knock. Not a neighbor. Too sharp. Not a delivery. Too late. He wiped his hands on his jeans and opened the door. And there she was, not the woman from the magazines, not the one he'd seen on CNBC explaining gene therapy to men twice her age. This woman was exhausted, her eyeliner smudged at the corners, her lips parted like she'd forgotten what she came to say. Still, her presence filled the porch. Cal didn't speak. He waited. I'm Evelyn Chase, she said. I think you know why I'm here. He did. The envelope she carried was thick. Medical records, probably. Photos, diagnoses. He'd seen plenty of them once. Before, I don't treat kids, he said. You don't treat anyone, she replied. The silence between them crackled. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and then fell quiet. You used to, she said. That part of me's dead. Her eyes flickered then, just slightly, not in disbelief, in recognition. My son Henry, she said, reaching into the envelope. 12. Since the accident, he hasn't spoken. At all. Cal said nothing. He didn't need to. She continued. He was in the back seat. The driver was drunk. My fault. I hired the security detail. I trusted them. Her voice faltered. Henry woke up in the hospital and just stopped being Henry. She held out a photo. Cal didn't take it. Still, he saw enough. A boy, with hair like ash, and wide, uncertain eyes. He wasn't smiling. But he wasn't vacant either. There was something alive in his face, something cornered. Therapists say it's psychological trauma. Neurologists say it might be more. Her hands tightened. I don't care what it is. I just want my son back. Cal looked past her. The Porsche gleamed behind her like a wolf in a sheep field. I'm not a miracle worker, he said. You were once, she replied, eyes sharp now. Before your wife, before the board hearings, before you disappeared into wood and silence. He stiffened. You read the reports. I read everything. Twice. I also read the testimonies of 4 families who said their children spoke for the first time after working with you. He shook his head. That was years ago. I used tools I wasn't qualified to use. Made calls I shouldn't have made. and gave hope where there was none, she said. Cal stepped back. Hope's a dangerous drug. Mrs. Chase. It sells easy. Leaves scars. For a moment, she said nothing. Just looked at him. Really looked. Not as a CEO desperate for results, but as a mother, standing in front of the last door, left on a street of closed ones. Then she reached into the envelope one last time. Not for a photo, for a drawing. It was crumpled. Childish. Done in pencil. Just 2 stick figures, one tall, one small standing, under what looked like a tree, and scribbled underneath, in shaky letters, "You, me, words again someday. Henry drew this last week," she said softly. "He hasn't drawn in months. This is the first time he's imagined a future where he speaks." Cal took the paper, held it longer than he meant to. "I can't promise anything," he said finally. "I won't lie to him, or to you." "I don't want lies," she replied. "I want someone who still believes in broken things." That evening, they met again, this time in his backyard. Lily, Cal's daughter, watched from the kitchen window. Henry sat stiffly in a chair near the garden bed, eyes flicking between the trees, Evelyn's shoulder, and Cal's boots. He didn't speak. Cal didn't either, not at first. Instead, he picked up a twig, handed it to Henry, then sat on the grass and began snapping sticks to size. A moment passed, then another. Henry broke his twig in two. Cal nodded, and Evelyn, behind the glass door, blinked fast because for the first time in 8 months, her son had responded, not with words, but with choice. Lily padded into the yard a few minutes later, held her dad's hand, looked at the boy with big, questioning eyes. "She doesn't talk much either," Cal said, nodding to her, "but she listens better than most people." Henry didn't react, but then he glanced briefly at Lily's tiny hand on her father's wrist. Evelyn felt her throat close. She had assistants, tutors, housekeepers, but never a hand like that on her. Never a child that trusted her enough to reach out without being asked. That night, Evelyn sat in her car for 15 minutes before driving home. In her lap was the drawing Henry had made. Cal had folded it carefully and handed it back to her before they said goodbye. On the other side of the paper, in different handwriting, was a single line. "Some trees grow again after lightning." Not all, but some. She traced the sentence with her fingertip, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Chapter 2. A Boy Who Doesn't Cry. The morning air smelled like firewood and old promises. Cal was already in the backyard when Evelyn arrived. His sleeves rolled to the elbows, hammering a wooden bench together. The rhythmic crack of mallet to chisel echoed into the trees. Henry sat on a blanket beneath the oak, knees tucked in, eyes blank but alert, not hiding. Not quite there either. Evelyn approached quietly. She hadn't slept again. The board had emailed at 3 a.m., asking if she intended to return to San Francisco for next quarter's investor round. She hadn't answered. Her son hadn't looked her in the eye in 245 days. That was the only number that mattered. Lily came out first, holding 2 mugs of cocoa, one sloshing slightly from her unsteady grip. She handed one to Cal. The other, she placed beside Henry's hand, not pushing, not pleading. Then she sat beside him and said nothing. Henry didn't move, but he didn't flinch either. That was something. Cal glanced at Evelyn. "He likes birds." She blinked. "Excuse me." The sketch he drew last week, stick figures under a tree, looked like a bird on one branch. Her brow furrowed. He used to sit at the window for hours, in his room, watching them. Before, Cal nodded. Most kids draw what they miss. He turned to his daughter, Lily. "Can you grab the carving box?" She nodded and trotted to the workshop. Evelyn took a slow breath, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. "Do you always teach like this?" Cal didn't look at her. I don't teach anymore, but you're doing something. He shrugged. I listen. That's different. Lily returned with a small wooden box. Inside were pieces of soft basswood, worn tools with wooden handles, and one unfinished carving. A bird with its wings, folded mid-rest. The feathers weren't perfect. One looked chipped. Cal handed it to Henry. Your hands, remember, he said gently. Henry stared at the carving. Then, with effort, he reached out, not to take it, but to touch it, slowly. His thumb brushed over the feathered back. Evelyn's breath caught. It was the most movement she'd seen from him in weeks. They stayed outside until dusk. Henry never spoke, never smiled, but he didn't retreat either. And when Cal suggested they build a birdhouse the next day together, Henry blinked once, a yes. Lily grinned. Evelyn turned away, so no one would see her cry. Later that night, Cal found a note under the mug Henry had left behind, a rough drawing another bird, but this time, its wings were open, below it, in faint pencil. Okay, that's all it said. And that's when Cal knew. Henry hadn't just shut the world out. He'd been waiting for a door that didn't ask him to walk through it. Just one that stayed open long enough to feel safe again. Your hands, remember. Sometimes, healing doesn't begin with therapy or surgery. Sometimes it begins with the feel of a wooden wing and the quiet understanding that you don't have to cry to be heard. The next afternoon, Evelyn returned with a clipboard in hand. Cal raised an eyebrow. I brought his therapy schedule, she said. Speech, OT, neurofeedback. I thought you might want to coordinate. I don't coordinate, Cal said, wiping sawdust from his palms. I'm trying to help. I know. He walked past her, toward the back steps. But your help comes with bullet points and progress charts. Mine comes with patience. Her jaw tensed. You think I haven't tried patience? I think, he said softly. You've been trying control. She swallowed hard. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Cal turned around. Come tomorrow, without the clipboard. She nodded. Once, that evening, Henry surprised her. He walked into the kitchen, unprompted, and placed the carved bird on the table. He didn't speak, didn't look up, but he'd brought her something. And Evelyn had no idea how to accept a gift from a boy who hadn't looked her in the eyes in 8 months. She didn't say thank you. Instead, she leaned down and whispered, I miss you, Henry. And she swore. For a split second, his lips moved. At 10 p, she called Brielle, her assistant. I need the week cleared, she said. You have 3 board meetings. I said, clear it. Click. She walked to Henry's room, stood outside the door, just listening to his soft breathing. He was still awake. She could feel it. And for the first time, she didn't rush in with plans or questions or expectations. She just stood there. Because maybe Cal was right. Maybe the first step to being heard is learning to listen. Chapter 3. The language of wood. Henry stood at the edge of the workbench, arms crossed, watching. Not with indifference, with intention. His eyes tracked every movement, how Cal angled the chisel, how his thumb followed the grain, how each cut was slow and deliberate, like he wasn't just shaping wood. He was asking it a question. Evelyn sat on a crate nearby, silent, unsure if her presence helped or hurt. Cal hadn't spoken much that morning, either. Just a quiet good morning, followed by a nod toward the tools and 2 wooden blocks, one for Henry, one for Lily. Lily had already begun sketching a flower into hers with a charcoal pencil, her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth in focused determination. Henry's piece remained untouched, but his fingers twitched near the edge of the table. I don't force first cuts, Cal said, voice soft. The wood doesn't like it. Evelyn blinked. The wood. It knows when you're rushing. It splits on you. Henry glanced at Cal, a flicker of interest. The first, Cal met his gaze. Want to try listening? Henry didn't move for a beat, then reached out and placed his palm on the smooth surface of the wood. Evelyn's breath caught. Cal didn't smile, didn't praise, just said, "Good start." The rest of the morning passed in near silence, save for the soft scratch of blade on grain, the occasional gust of wind, the rhythmic creak of the porch swing behind them. At one point, Cal handed Henry a curved rasp. "Let the wood guide your hand, not the other way around." Henry didn't look at him, but he took the rasp and began. The motion was awkward at first, unsure, jagged. The tool slipped once, leaving a shallow gash in the wood's edge. Henry froze. Evelyn tensed, but Cal only said, "Mistakes are part of the design." Henry stared at the mark. Then he nodded, just once, like he understood. Later that afternoon, Evelyn followed Cal into the side shed. Curious, "Do you always talk to wood like it's alive?" she asked. "It is," he replied, "in its way." She folded her arms, half smiling. "You're a strange man." Cal didn't answer. Instead, he opened a tall cabinet and pulled out a small, box-shaped carving, one Evelyn hadn't seen before. It was unfinished, but it was something. A small house, slanted roof, tiny porch. There were no windows, just a single door, and carved into the threshold, "Come back when you're ready." Evelyn's voice dropped. "Did you make this for your wife?" He didn't flinch. "No," he said. "For me." He placed it back on the shelf. "Some people bury their pain," he added. "I carve mine." That night, Evelyn sat in her car again, staring at the steering wheel long after Henry had gone to bed. She couldn't stop thinking about that house, the missing windows, the closed door, her own heart. How many years had she built glass towers to hide how hollow everything felt? How many boardrooms had she dominated while quietly breaking inside? And now, here she was, in a stranger's backyard, watching her son come back to life through wood and dust and silence. The next day, Cal wasn't in the yard. Lily said he was in the woods, listening. Evelyn found him beside the creek that edged his property, sitting on a stump, eyes closed, hands resting on a fresh block of cedar. "I used to need 10 years of training and machines that cost millions to make a child speak," he said, without opening his eyes. "Now I just need this," and quiet. She stepped closer. "Do you think Henry will ever talk again?" Cal opened his eyes slowly, looked at her. "Talking's overrated," he said, "but connection." He tapped his chest. "That's everything." That afternoon, Henry made his first deliberate mark, a shallow curve across the edge of his carving block. It didn't look like much, but to Cal, it was the equivalent of a syllable, a breath. And to Evelyn, it was a miracle. She didn't say anything, didn't cheer or cry or touch him. She just sat beside him and whispered, "You don't have to hurry. Baby, I'm here. Mistakes are part of the design." Not all scars ruin the piece. Some become the reason it's beautiful. That evening, Cal walked Evelyn to her car. She paused at the driver's side, keys in hand. "You ever think you'll go back?" she asked. "To medicine." His jaw tightened. "I lost a child once," he said. "Not mine. A patient." I was too confident, too sure. He looked away. "I don't need to lose another to remember why I stopped." Evelyn looked at him, her voice steady. "You didn't lose Henry." "No," Cal whispered, "but I'm starting to feel like I might find myself." Inside, Henry kept carving, and for the first time, his hand didn't shake. Chapter 4. Secrets Carved in Silence. At the top of the city, Evelyn Chase lived in a glass box. Her penthouse shimmered with award plaques, modern sculptures, imported lighting that dimmed by voice command. She had everything except warmth. The silence in her home was clinical, intentional. There was no clutter, no scent of meals cooked or voices raised, just marble countertops and echoes. Tonight, she stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, listening to the voice of her head of PR. You've been off the grid a week. Evelyn, that's not like you. Investors are nervous. I don't care, she said, quietly. You should. The press is sniffing around. Someone spotted you in Connecticut with a child. She turned away from the window. That child is my son. Of course, it's just the optics, I said. She interrupted. I don't care. She hung up. And for the first time since she was 23, she left a half glass of wine untouched on the table and sat on the floor, staring at nothing. Cal's kitchen couldn't have been more different. The tiles were chipped. The fridge made a soft hum. The light above the sink flickered when the heat kicked on, but it was warm. Lily sat at the table, chewing the end of a pencil while working on homework. A plate of peanut butter crackers sat beside her. Henry was nearby, on the floor, surrounded by carving shavings and open sketchbooks. He didn't speak, but he hummed, soft, barely audible, like memory returning in fragments. Cal glanced over but said nothing, just stirred the soup on the stove, one hand gripping the spoon, the other resting flat on the counter, grounding himself. He hadn't had two kids in this kitchen since before. He exhaled. Not tonight. Later, while Lily slept and Henry was tucked into Cal's guest bed, Evelyn arrived. Rain streaked her windshield. She didn't get out at first. Just watched the porch light flicker in the mist, like it was deciding whether to welcome her. Cal opened the door before she knocked. You knew I was here, she asked. He held up a mug, made 2 teas. Figured you'd need one? Inside. They sat on the floor in the den. No fireplace, just a small heater that clicked softly. Evelyn held the mug between her hands. I used to believe love was a distraction, she said, that it softened women, made them unreliable. Cal didn't answer. She went on. When Henry was born, I had a nanny before I had a crib. Board meetings, 3 weeks postpartum. I flew to Zurich while still pumping milk between panels. Her voice trembled. I told myself I was doing it for him, that I was building something he could be proud of. She looked up at Cal, but I missed everything. First laugh, first steps. The first time he called someone mama, it was the nanny. Silence settled. I built empires, she whispered, but I can't build my own son back. Cal leaned forward. You can't build him, he said, but you can hold him. That's enough. She blinked fast, then looked down at her hands. They don't feel like mother's hands, she said. Cal reached across the space between them and placed a carving knife in her palm. They will, he said. The next day, Evelyn asked to learn, not as a CEO, not as a client, but as Henry's mother. She sat beside her son on the workbench, fumbling with the knife, scraping uneven strokes across the edge of her first block. It was jagged, awkward, ugly. She frowned. I'm terrible at this. Henry reached over, took her hand, and guided her cut. For the first time, she let someone else lead. That afternoon, while Henry napped, Evelyn wandered into the workshop alone. She found a shelf of old carvings, each signed with a small C at the base. A few were playful wooden birds, small foxes, chess pieces, but one stopped her. It was a figure of a woman, carved with haunting grace, her hair blown sideways, her hands outstretched, as if bracing against something invisible. At the base, carved faintly, Eliza. Evelyn touched it. Your wife? She asked, when Cal appeared behind her. He nodded. The only piece I kept. She looks like she's flying and falling at the same time. She was always both. He stepped beside her. She was a therapist. Brilliant. Fierce. The best I ever knew. What happened? Cal hesitated. There was a patient. A child. Severe abuse history. Elise missed the signs. The girl took her own life. Evelyn's breath caught. They blamed her. She blamed herself. A pause, and I blamed the system. Tried to sue the state, the clinic, the licensing board. While I was raging, she broke. Evelyn turned to him. She didn't leave you. The world failed her. She left me in pieces, Cal said quietly. and I've been carving those pieces ever since. She looks like she's flying and falling at the same time. Some people become statues in our hearts, not because they stood still, but because they shattered beautifully. That night, Evelyn stayed later than usual. Cal cooked dinner, grilled cheese, and tomato soup. Simple, perfect. Lily insisted they light candles, even though the overhead lights worked just fine. Henry sat between them. At one point, Cal said something about sanding too hard and messing up the grain. Henry smiled, not wide, but real, and Evelyn, startled, touched her lips like she'd seen a ghost. Her son smiled. After dinner, Cal walked her to the porch again. She didn't rush, didn't hide behind CEO posture or productivity. She stood in the rain with him and whispered, "Do you believe people can be forgiven for the time they missed?" He didn't speak right away. Then, gently, only if they stop trying to buy it back and start showing up. Evelyn nodded. "I'll be here every day." Then I believe it. Inside, on the table, Henry left a carving he'd made without being asked. A half-finished bird. Next to it, a note in his shaky handwriting. "Tomorrow, I want to show you what it sounds like when wings start to move." Chapter 5. My daughter's laugh. The town carousel hadn't spun in years. Its paint had faded. Horses chipped and frozen mid-leap. But it still stood in the center of Willow Park like an aging fairy tale. Children rarely came anymore. The world had moved on, faster and louder. But this morning, it was alive, not because of crowds, because of one little girl's laugh. Lily Dawson ran in slow circles around the center pole, hands stretched out like airplane wings. Her laughter ringing clear against the backdrop of soft organ music playing from Cal's old Bluetooth speaker. Henry stood beside Evelyn on the worn wooden platform, eyes wide, lips parted, almost smiling. Evelyn had never heard that laugh before, not from her son, but from Lily. She could feel it in her chest, like sunlight breaking through stained glass. "She's different out here," Evelyn whispered. Cal nodded beside her, resting his hand on the brass rail. Lily was born serious. But when her mom died, she stopped laughing completely. For a year, Evelyn turned to him. What changed? Cal's eyes stayed on his daughter. "This place." One afternoon, she saw me fixing one of the horses, climbed on without asking, slipped, skinned her elbow. But she laughed. First time in 12 months. He paused, not because she fell, but because she said the horse caught her on the way down. Evelyn smiled faintly. "She's got poetry in her bones. She's got her mother." Henry reached out and touched one of the horses, a faded black mare with a golden bridle. The wood flaked under his fingertips, but his eyes lit up. Lily ran to him. "That one's named Sparrow. She's the fastest." Henry's hand stayed on the mane. "She's waiting for someone to ride her again," Lily added softly. Henry looked at Evelyn, then so gently it nearly passed, unnoticed. He nodded. Not big, not dramatic, but real. Evelyn felt her throat close. "You okay?" Cal asked quietly. She nodded. I think I'm seeing my son again." Later, Cal unpacked a picnic from his truck. Peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, hot cider in mason jars, wrapped with socks for insulation. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What? You don't have sock cups in your penthouse," Cal teased. She laughed, not politely, not performatively. A full laugh, rich, surprised, almost girlish. Lily gasped, "Miss Evelyn, you laughed like a real person." Henry cracked a half smile. Evelyn covered her face, cheeks flushing. "I guess I've forgotten how." Cal handed her a sandwich. "It's like carving. You remember when it matters." They sat together under the oak tree by the carousel, a cluster of mismatched humans tied together by shared silences and broken pieces. Lily leaned into Evelyn's side as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and Evelyn, who had built walls taller than the skyscraper she owned, let the child rest there, not because she was ready, but because she was tired of being alone in rooms full of people. Later, Cal showed Henry how to sand the base of a wooden horse. He guided his hand over the edge, slow and steady. Henry followed. Then, without being asked, reached for the rasp and continued on his own. "He wants to work," Evelyn whispered. "No," Cal said. "He wants to belong." She blinked. Cal stood, brushing sawdust from his jeans. Kids don't care about outcomes. They care about connection. Evelyn looked toward her son, who was now covered in dust. His hair mussed, his sleeves rolled. He looked like a child, not a patient. And for the first time, so did she. Not a CEO, not a failure, just a mom. She laughed, not because she fell, but because the horse caught her on the way down. Some laughter isn't about joy. It's about relief, about realizing you're not falling alone anymore. As they packed up to leave, Evelyn spotted something tucked in the grass, an old carousel token, tarnished, initials faded. She held it up. Cal smiled. They used to hand those out for free rides on birthdays. Evelyn traced the edges. Maybe next week, Henry will want to use it. Cal's expression softened. He already has. She looked at him. What do you mean? He pointed toward the horizon, where Henry and Lily walked ahead side by side. He chose to come, to stay, to try. Evelyn held the token tightly in her fist. For once, faith didn't feel like a currency. It felt like a memory waiting to happen. That night, Evelyn stood at the mirror brushing her hair, something she hadn't done slowly in years. In the reflection, she saw Henry in the next room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing, not sketching, drawing, alive, present. He held up the paper, a horse, a small girl, and a woman with a briefcase lying on the grass laughing. He handed it to her. No words, just his eyes. And Evelyn finally realized she didn't need him to say mom. She just needed him to see her as one. Chapter 6. The Fall of Dr. Dawson. It rained all day. A heavy, moaning kind of rain that drummed low and steady on Cal's roof, turning the garden path into dark veins of mud. The sky was the color of wet concrete, and even the birds stayed silent. Evelyn stayed late, not because of the weather, because tonight something in Cal felt off. He was quiet in a different way, not still hollow. Henry and Lily sat cross-legged in the den, carving soft pine under the lamplight. Evelyn leaned in the kitchen doorway, watching Cal. He stood at the sink, hands motionless on a cup he'd been rinsing for 5 full minutes. "Cal," she said gently, "come sit." He didn't answer, just dried his hands and walked past her toward the porch. She found him sitting on the steps, rain misting his shoulders. A whiskey glass sat beside him, untouched. He didn't look at her when she joined him. "Do you ever wonder," he said slowly, "why we only forgive ourselves when it's too late?" Evelyn said nothing, so he told her, before the accident, before Southridge, before the silence and the wood and the long nights with carving blades, there was Dr. Caleb Dawson, lead pediatric speech and trauma rehabilitation specialist at Brookfield Neurological Center. His office had smelled like cinnamon and old books. Kids called him Dr. Calm because his voice was low and slow, like bedtime. He was good. He was gifted, especially with the ones other doctors called lost causes. And then there was Grace, he said quietly. Evelyn turned to him. She was 9. Foster care, history of abuse so thick, the files weighed more than her. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, just stared. He took a breath, but she liked wood. I brought her small carving blocks, said they were just for fidgeting. She started sanding, then shaping, then sketching. Never said a word, but she carved little houses, over and over. Houses with no windows, no doors, just walls. Evelyn's heart thudded. Was she getting better? Cal's voice cracked. I thought so. One morning, he arrived early. Her room was open, empty. He found her outside, sitting by the fountain, carving. She smiled at him. Smiled. She handed him her final piece, a little house with a door, a crack of hope. It was the last thing she ever made. That night, she died by suicide. No note, no sign, just gone. I missed something, Cal whispered. All that training, all that trust, and I missed what she was really saying. His voice shook. She wasn't building safety. She was building walls to say goodbye. Evelyn placed her hand over his. Her story didn't end with you, she said, but maybe yours begins with her. He looked up at her. For a long time, I thought, if I punished myself enough, left medicine, left everything, I'd balance the scale. She squeezed his hand. Redemption doesn't come from hiding. Cal, they sat in silence. Only the rain spoke. Inside, the fire crackled. The kids had fallen asleep on the couch. Wood chips and soft snoring tangled in blankets. Evelyn watched them, her heart full of something that felt like fear and peace at the same time. You saved Henry, she whispered to Cal. He stepped behind her. No, he said. Henry's saving himself. Later, as she slipped on her coat, Cal reached for something inside the drawer. A folded piece of wood, sanded smooth, painted with childish brush strokes. Grace's house? He handed it to Evelyn. She'd want it with someone who understands walls. Evelyn held it gently. I do, she whispered. He opened the door for her, but her heart, it stayed right there. She wasn't building safety. She was building walls to say goodbye. Some houses keep you warm. Others keep the world out. But the bravest thing you can do is build one someone else can walk into. The next morning, Henry said his first word. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear, but it was real. He looked at Cal, held up his newest carving, a little fox, and said, "This, just that." Cal froze, then smiled. And across the room, Evelyn wept silently, beautifully, because silence wasn't absence anymore. It was the space where miracles waited. Chapter 7, his first word. It was the kind of morning that felt like a held breath. Crisp air, sun breaking through maple leaves, the smell of cinnamon tea drifting from the house like a memory trying to find its way back home. Henry sat at the carving table, shoulders hunched, eyes focused on a block of basswood. Today's project, a fox. Lily had brought a storybook from the library about forest animals the night before. Foxes, she said, were clever, watchful, survivors. Henry hadn't said anything, as usual. But when Cal offered him a choice of animals to carve this morning, Henry had pointed directly to the fox. No hesitation. Evelyn arrived late, breathless and wrapped in a long beige coat. Her hair was loose and accidental softness. She paused when she saw Henry already working, his fingers moving with quiet purpose. He started without me, she said, half smiling. Cal looked up from across the table. He's finding his own rhythm now. Evelyn sat beside her son. She didn't reach for him, didn't press. She just watched. Henry was carving the ears now, slow and focused, a deep furrow between his brows. His hands shook once, then steadied again. The wind picked up. A gust scattered dry leaves across the table, lifting the edge of Henry's sketch. He reached quickly to save it, and in the process, his carving slipped from his hand and clattered onto the ground. The nose chipped. It wasn't much, but Henry froze. Evelyn started to reach for him. Cal caught her wrist gently. Let him feel it, he said softly. Don't rush to fix. Henry picked up the fox, stared at the chip. He ran his finger along the damaged snout. Then, very quietly, he looked at Cal, held the figure in his hand, and said, "This," Evelyn gasped. The word barely made a sound. More breath than syllable, but it was there. Real. Spoken. Cal knelt beside him. Say it again. Henry looked at the fox, then at his mother. This, and then, like something inside cracked open. Fox. I made a fox. Evelyn's hands flew to her mouth. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears rushing hot and uninvited. Henry turned to her, his expression soft. I wanted to show you, he said slowly. But my words were stuck, she sobbed, and laughed, and hugged him so tightly she thought the sky might split. Cal stepped back, his own throat tight. Lily beamed. Henry pulled away slightly and looked up at Cal. Thank you. 2 words that felt like a cathedral being built, one stone at a time. Cal crouched beside him. You did that, he said. You carved your voice. They didn't do any more carving that day. Instead, they walked through the park, down the wooded trail behind the workshop. Henry picked up leaves, named colors, whispered questions. Not all of it made sense, but his voice was back hesitant, cracked. But his... Later, Evelyn stood with Cal under the oak tree. She was shaking, not from cold, from something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. It's really happening, she whispered. Isn't it? Cal nodded. It's only the beginning. She looked at him, at the man who had carved healing into her son, at the man whose own life had been carved by loss. You were never just a doctor, she said. You're something else entirely. That night, Henry fell asleep holding the fox. Lily curled next to him on the couch, reading aloud, softly, from the forest animal book. Evelyn stepped into the kitchen where Cal was cleaning up. The house was dark, except for the soft lamplight above the sink. She reached for his hand. I'm scared, she admitted. Cal looked at her. Of what? She swallowed. That this is the top of the mountain. That everything's uphill again from here. He dried his hands. It will be, he said honestly. But this time, you're not climbing alone. Sometimes, the smallest word becomes the loudest miracle. That weekend, Evelyn canceled 2 board meetings, told her assistant not to call. Instead, she and Henry carved a second fox together. It was uneven, its legs too short, its tail lopsided, but Henry didn't care. He painted it orange with bright blue eyes and placed it on Cal's mantle beside the first one. On the bottom, in Henry's own handwriting, I spoke today. Chapter 8, Betrayal in the Boardroom. 2 weeks after Henry's first word, Evelyn returned to the city, not because she wanted to, because she had to. The investors had grown restless. Rumors were circulating, and someone had leaked a photo of her outside Cal's workshop, dirt on her heels, sawdust on her coat, hugging a child no one recognized, except the boy was Henry, her son. The one they all believed was still too ill to be seen. Chase Biomed's 52nd floor boardroom hadn't changed. Glass walls, cold light, 12 chairs that cost more than most employees made in a month. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, posture immaculate, heart hammering. Across from her, Julian Marks, Chief Operating Officer and longtime vulture, slid a file across the table. We've had concerns. Evelyn, she didn't open the file. Defined concerns, unexplained absences, unreachable on critical days. Now this, he tapped the photo projected on the screen. Evelyn kneeling in the grass, Henry's arms wrapped around her neck, Cal's hand resting on the boy's back. The caption read, CEO abandons company for unlicensed therapist. Julian leaned forward. Are you aware that man had his medical license revoked? Her throat tightened. Are you aware that man gave my son his voice back? The room fell silent. Evelyn stood, walked slowly to the window. None of you have seen Henry. For 10 months, he lived behind glass, silent, disconnected, lost. She turned to face them. Now he laughs. He carves. He whispers stories. Because of someone you're calling a liability. The chairman, an aging billionaire in a perfect suit, cleared his throat. You must understand, Evelyn. Optics matter. I am the optics, she said calmly. This company was built on my name, my face, my vision. And what if that vision is compromised? She stared at them, fire rising in her chest. I've compromised everything for this place. My body, my time, my son. Julian spoke again. We're not here to punish, but we're considering an executive reassignment. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. You want to demote me to protect the company from healing, from scandal. She took a breath, cold and deep. Then let's be clear, she said. You can have my seat. A ripple went through the room, but you won't have my silence. She walked out before anyone could reply. Back in her office, her assistant Brielle waited with wide eyes. They're voting, probably already did, Evelyn said. Brielle hesitated. Do you regret it? The carving? The time away? Cal, no, Evelyn said, because I didn't lose my company. I found my son. That night, she drove back to Southridge. Rain blurred the windshield. She didn't care. When she pulled into Cal's driveway, the porch light blinked on. The door opened before she knocked. Henry ran to her. Mom, he said, his voice clear now. She fell to her knees, hugged him so hard her ribs hurt. Cal stepped onto the porch. She looked up at him. I think I just lost everything I built. He knelt beside her, wiped the rain from her cheek. No, he whispered. You just built something else. You can have my seat, but you won't have my silence. Sometimes walking away from power is the only way to finally feel free. Later that week, Evelyn received the official board decision. She was relieved of her executive duties. Effective immediately. The press had a field day, but Evelyn didn't hide. She issued a public statement. If helping my son rediscover his voice means losing mine in your boardroom, so be it. I'd rather sit at a workbench in a backyard than at the head of a table where my child is forgotten. It went viral in hours. Parents began writing to her. Thousands stories of children who were overlooked, dismissed, misdiagnosed. A movement began, not led by a CEO, led by a mother who'd remembered what mattered. Evelyn founded a new initiative, Voicecraft, a foundation dedicated to alternative healing through fine motor therapy, woodworking, and emotional connection for trauma-affected children. And Cal? He said yes when she asked him to co-lead it, not for credit, but for the kids. Chapter 9. Letters I Never Sent. Cal hadn't opened the attic in over a year, not since Lily had asked, why don't we go up there anymore? And he'd pretended not to hear her. But tonight, with Evelyn downstairs, helping Henry build his first full sculpture, a wooden lighthouse, he finally climbed the narrow staircase. The rain had returned, soft and steady, whispering across the roof like footsteps from the past. He opened the door and stood still. The room smelled like cedar and paper, old files, art supplies, a forgotten sweater draped over a rocking chair. A box labeled Elise. He crouched, running his fingers over the duct tape sealing the lid, then pulled it open. Inside, her notebooks, a faded baby onesie, a photo from their last vacation before the hearings, and beneath it all, a stack of letters, unsent. The first was dated 2 weeks after Elise died. Dear Elise, I don't know how to parent without your laugh filling in the silences. Lily asks for you in her sleep. I tell her you're in the stars, but I know she's listening for the front door. I am too. His hands trembled. He read another. I still blame myself for the girl you couldn't save, for not seeing how heavy it got for you. I was too busy defending you to notice you were fading. And then another, undated. There's a woman now, strong, too, but not hardened like us. She's breaking open in all the ways you warned me not to trust. Her son, is finding his voice, and I think she's helping me find mine again, too. He closed the box, not to forget, but because he didn't need the letters anymore. He was ready to say those words out loud. Downstairs, Evelyn was cleaning paint off Henry's fingertips with an old towel, laughing as he pointed at the lighthouse and declared, "That's where I'll keep my dreams." Cal stood in the doorway, watching them, then walked in. "Can I show you something?" he asked Evelyn. She nodded. He led her to the attic, lit a candle, handed her the last letter. She read it slowly, carefully. Her eyes shimmered. "Maybe you're helping me remember who I was before I gave up. Maybe you're showing me it's okay to begin again." She looked up at him. "I wrote letters once too," she whispered. "Not on paper. In my head, to Henry, every day, about how I didn't know how to be enough, about how I was scared he'd never forgive me for not being the kind of mother who stayed." Cal reached for her hand. "You stayed," he said, "when it mattered most." They sat together for a long time, not touching, just close. Later that night, Evelyn returned home. In the entryway, she found a small package. No note, just a carved bird, the kind Henry made in his early days with Cal. But this one had wings spread wide. And at the base, in Henry's handwriting, "I forgive you," she cried in her kitchen, alone, the way women do when no one's looking, safely, fiercely, and without apology. Then she walked upstairs, kissed her sleeping son's forehead, and whispered the 3 words she'd never been brave enough to say. "I forgive me. I forgive you." Some words we long to hear have to come from voices we didn't expect, and sometimes those voices sound like our own. The next day, Evelyn packed up her Manhattan apartment. She didn't announce it. She just did it. Henry wanted to stay in Southridge. Lily needed them. And Evelyn, she needed the quiet. Later that afternoon, she handed Cal a box of her own. Inside, dozens of journals. "Gee, I thought they were business notes," she said. Turns out, they were unsent letters. Cal smiled. "Maybe we should read them together." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Chapter 10. The Boy Who Called Her Mom. The folding chairs were uneven. The banner was crooked. The lemonade was warm. And still, it was perfect. Voicecraft's first public gathering wasn't flashy. No press, no investors, just families, children, laughter. Cal's old woodworking tools lined the front table. Evelyn had made sure every kid had a name tag. No titles, no labels, just names. Henry stood in the center of it all, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. His newest carving tucked in his hand, a small lighthouse. This one painted deep red with a yellow top. Evelyn knelt beside him, smoothing his collar. "You sure you want to do this?" He nodded. "I wrote it myself." She kissed his forehead. "You don't have to be perfect." He smiled. "I just have to be me." When it was his turn, Cal gently helped him up the wooden step. Henry looked out at the small group, cleared his throat, held up the lighthouse. "I made this," he said softly, "because I used to be lost." A quiet ripple went through the audience. Some parents clutching hands tighter. "But someone told me that even if you're lost, a light can still find you." He turned to look at his mother. "And sometimes, that light is a person." A pause. "Then, Mom." Evelyn's heart broke and stitched itself back together in the same second. She covered her mouth, not from shame, from wonder. Henry smiled again. "She's my light." Applause came slowly, not because they weren't moved, but because some moments are too holy for noise. Later, Cal found Evelyn behind the center, sitting on a wooden bench someone had made from scrap planks and care. He sat beside her, said nothing. She spoke first. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" Cal chuckled. "You said you didn't care about false hope, that you'd already bought every kind." She smiled. "Turns out, the real kind doesn't come with a price tag." He looked at her, the woman who once ruled empires, now barefoot in the grass, mascara smudged from tears, a daisy in her hand, and more alive than anyone he'd ever met. She turned to him. "Cal," she whispered, "what happens next?" He leaned back, eyes on the sky. "We build," he said. "More carving." He shook his head. "More truth." They sat in silence for a while, until Evelyn took something from her bag. A small journal. She handed it to him. "The first page is blank," she said. "It's for letters we will send." He opened it, wrote a single line. "Today, the boy who once lived in silence called her mom. She's my light." Some people don't just walk into your life, they shine a light inside it. And wait there until you can finally see yourself. Back at the community center, the kids had begun gathering again. Lily ran up to Henry, handing him a paintbrush. "Want to help me finish the mural?" He grinned. "Let's make it loud." The mural would stretch across the whole back wall by summer. Foxes, birds, lighthouses, names, a boy's voice rising, a woman's heart open, and two hands, one large, one small carving something beautiful from what once was pain. Where the light finds you, it begins with silence, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that holds. A silence between breaths, between broken hearts, between two people who never meant to find each other. A boy who stopped speaking, a man who stopped believing, a woman who stopped feeling, and then something small. A carving knife passed between fingers, a fox with uneven legs, a word whispered like a prayer. This, they never set out to become a family. Not Cal, whose grief had grown too heavy to name. Not Evelyn, who had traded time for power and nearly lost what mattered most. Not Henry, who had built a world inside his head because the outside one felt too sharp. But somehow, through rain-soaked wood, laughter on a broken carousel, and a single moment when a boy called a woman mom, they found something no diagnosis, no boardroom, no amount of money could ever promise. Connection. There are no grand speeches here, just small truths, whispered like bedtime stories. A man who once saved lives with scalpels now saves them with sawdust and patience. A woman who built billion-dollar companies now builds lighthouses out of clay and writes letters she no longer hides. A boy who carved his way back to language now teaches others that your voice isn't in your throat, it's in your choice to be seen. And in a town called Southridge, a mural grows wider every week, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. Tell us, what are your thoughts on this story? Leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment of our latest stories. And don't miss out. Click here to watch more now. Thank you for watching The Billionaire CEO and the Carpenter's Daughter, a true love story, not about being saved, but about being stayed with.